Okay, I told you I'd talk about UICs. Here we go. Now, if you answered up at the very top question, I'm gesturing down here. If you went to the very top left-handed question on those two flow charts, and you said, I want to follow the UIC regs. So now you've gone to chapter 5.6, and here's in the UIC regs, here's how you determine treatment. So I just went through the process to determine what level of treatment you need and what treatment devices you need to use if you're following the core elements. Those two flowcharts I just went through. Now, if you're doing UIC, you're not discharging to the you're not discharging anything to the MS4 and you're following the UIC. Here's how you determine treatment. And you determine treatment through three matrices. One is a land use evaluation to determine pollutant loading. One is a Vadose zone treatment evaluation to determine the ability of the existing soils between the bottom of the BMP, the dry well, at the bottom of the UIC, and the top of the seasonal high groundwater. That's that unsaturated soil, a zone of soil. And that's where the treatment gets provided. So we need to determine what level of treatment we can get there, all the way from high to none. And then you use those values and you identify where the two of them come together, and that identifies the amount of treatment that you have to do before you put water into that UIC. This is following the UIC rule. So here's the first one. Here's the Vadose zone treatment capacity. So high level of treatment, you have a saturated hydraulic conductivity below 2.4. You have a silt to clay reference. You have a CEC greater than 5. These details up here are part of the site suitability criteria. And then you have medium, which makes a little bit higher infiltration rate, less treatment capacity, again, low, higher infiltration rate yet, and none, meaning there's no way of treating as it goes through. The water's just going to go straight through the gravel into the ground. So there's very specific footnotes down here to what you need to do. And if you're using the presumptive approach to identify the necessary level of stormwater treatment prior to discharging a UIC well. So I've determined my level of treatment. Now, what kind of land use do I have? And so here is a way of looking at the land use you have. What's going on? Similar to the chart that we had a few figures ago, where we had land use, and using that land use determined whether you had to do metals treatment or not, or whether you had to do basic treatment or not. We got a land use identification. So parking areas, other land use characteristics, roadways inside and outside the urban growth management, insignificant for no motorized vehicles. It's not going to get oil. It's not going to have a lot of dirt coming onto it. Low, medium, and then high. ADTs identified for us, specific numbers that we can use to say, yes, it's in medium, or no, it's not in medium. It's in low. So we have a way of calculating exactly what classification we have for those. And once we get to that point, we now have this matrix that takes treatment capacity on the top, pollutant loading on the bottom, and you identify where you are in that thing. And so if you're a medium, you're down here where it says remove solids. And if you look at footnote C says that means basic treatment. We have to use the terminology of removing soils here because that's what's used in the WAC, the UIC WAC. So we have to follow the UIC WAC exactly when we're doing it here. And then in our manual, we're defining it. So pre-treatment is defined at removing solids at less than basic treatment. And so we have specific BMPs that can meet basic treatment. Hydrodynamic separators, for example, meet basic treatment. Catch basins with downturned elbows don't meet basic treatment. We included that. That's a two-stage dry well, catch basin with a downturned elbow. This used to say none, and then in the WAC, this says none. We've changed that in the manual to a two-stage dry well because we're trying to protect the UIC, maintenance in the UIC. This helps us with maintenance. And notice we have removing solids, pre-treatment, removing solids, and removing oil. We don't have removal of phosphorus, and we don't have removal of metals in the UIC rule. And that's because water's going into the ground. And in the groundwaters, we're not worried about dissolved copper and dissolved zinc and total phosphorus. So if you're doing UICs, we're not treating for metals or phosphorus. So at the same time, I want to enhance and to push the process that you determine treatment in two different ways, whether you're following the UIC rule or you're following the permit. There are two distinct processes that you follow. And if you're following the core elements, you follow the permit process where you go through that flow chart I showed you of how to determine what treatment you had to do. And then you go through the flow chart of what BMPs can provide that treatment. If you're doing UIC, you're using this process of these matrices. You do not use this process of the matrix to determine your level of treatment if you're following the core elements. The UIC allows treatment before going into the ground less than basic treatment. The permit does not allow that. If you're going to put water into the ground or into the surface waters, you must provide basic treatment if you're following the core elements. If you're following the UIC, you can get by with less. But the jurisdiction has to decide what it means to be what their definition of all runoff is, to determine whether the proponents for new and redevelopment can go through the UIC process or the permit process. And if they're going through the UIC process, there's no regulatory threshold of 1 acre. Going through the permit process, there is that regulatory threshold. So there are decisions that have to be made up front in the process from a regulatory perspective.